Well, we have a wonderful devotional this morning by Deanna Emmerich. Deanna, come on up. Deanna is actually the minister of the day. She oversees the minister of the day, so if you've ever called, that's Deanna's team, and she does an amazing job. Thanks, Deanna.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, welcome again, and I am so honored to be here with you today. And Liz just said it so perfectly when she prayed that this is an opportunity for us to connect with God, and He connects with us. And I do believe the Holy Spirit is right here amongst us to make sure that God is ministering to you as individuals and as a whole. One thing I was thinking about is in terms of, I like to take scripture kind of in chunks. Sometimes we need to read it in total, and sometimes it's good to take just chunks and meditate, think about it. And so this afternoon, what I'd like to focus on with you is a passage that's probably very, very familiar to you, Philippians 4, 6, and 7. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything, with prayer and supplication and thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And then the peace of God that surpasses our understanding will keep our hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. This afternoon, I'd like us to have just a moment where we can kind of focus on our connection, just us and God, as if we're the only two in the room, Him and us. And so I'd like to invite you to do a little exercise with me, and it's one that I've used a lot over the past 2 years with the pandemic, serving as minister of the day. Sometimes things get a little like a pressure cooker when we're caring for people with lots of different kinds of needs. And this is really kind of easy, and it's simply breathing. I'm going to teach you how to breathe, okay? Is that okay? If you don't know how, does anybody not know how to breathe? Because that's going to be my primary concern right now. We want to poke you and see if we can get you awake. I'm going to teach you a slightly different way to breathe, perhaps. One is, and we're just going to start doing it together, is we're just going to inhale. And when you inhale, I want you to inhale almost to the feeling that your capacity of your lungs, like you're a balloon, and maybe you're going to pop. Inhale as deeply as you can. Hold it. 2, 3, 4. And exhale through your mouth like you're blowing through a straw. Slowly, carefully, intentionally just let that breath out. Breathe in again. Feel, maybe this time when you're breathing, you can breathe even a little deeper until your lungs feel like they're just full. Hold it. 2, 3, 4. And now exhale through your mouth. And as you do, feel your shoulders start to drop. Feel your neck, the tension in your neck, start to loosen a bit. Feel your lungs kind of ease with the air going in and out. Feel the tension in your head go away. We're going to do one more. Breathe in through your nose as deeply as you can. Fill, fill, fill. Hold it. 2, 3, 4, and exhale through your mouth. And now I'm going to say that scripture again. As you breathe at your own cadence, at your own rhythm, just relax. Try to let your mind dismiss those other things for just a moment. Be anxious for nothing. But in everything with prayer and supplication and thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And then the peace that surpasses our understanding will keep our hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. I'd like to offer you the idea that Jesus doesn't say to us, as people who care for others with mental illnesses or mental health challenges, or maybe it's us ourselves that have those challenges, he does not say, be anxious for nothing, and then he walks away. But he gives us something to do. To connect with him as our secure attachment. We can attach to God and be made safe. And it's from that point that we can then spill out our anxieties and our cares to him, knowing that we're completely safe. And we can make our requests be made known to God. And I'd like to suggest that passage is offering us that in that moment where we have poured out all of our anxieties, that it's then that his peace that is beyond our comprehension can keep our hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. We get the infill of his peace when we have outpoured all of our stress and anxiety. So that's something I hope you can carry with you in the weeks to come. And just remember to keep breathing.
Thanks, Deanna. Appreciate that. Hi, everybody. Thank you. I am Kay Warren. Some of you are brand new and you don't know me, so I just want to make sure I introduce myself. Gotten to meet some of you for the first time that you're here today. I'm so glad that you are here and that you've joined us. I get to introduce our speakers. Normally we have a time of table time where you get to talk about the month that's just been behind you and what's going on, and we're going to give some of that time to our speakers today because they have some table time built into their time. So you're going to get to talk with each other, you're going to get to process information, but we're not doing it exactly at this moment. So let me introduce to you two of my really good friends. I'm going to give you their professional bio, but I know them primarily as friends, as dear friends, people who have stood by me and Rick in some of our darkest times, not only as friends, but also offering their wisdom that they've learned through their work with thousands and thousands of individuals. So Milan and Kay Yerkovich specialize in couples marriage counseling, and they are the founders of Relationship 180. Christian Counseling Center here in the Saddleback Valley that specializes in the application of attachment research. I love that Deanna talked about attachment. Milan and Kay are going to talk about attachment. You're going to hear all about attachment, and if you don't know anything about attachment other than like what magnets do, they attach to other magnets. If that's the extent of what you know about attachment, you're going to learn a lot today. But they're creators of the Attachment Core Pattern Therapy. And they've co-authored a couple of books. One of them is How We Love, and I think we have some at the back table. If you have not read How We Love, you don't have to be married. In fact, I would say read it before you get married because you're going to learn so much about yourself. It will affect the way you do all of your relationships. And if you are married and are wondering why you are stuck and keep hitting those same walls over and over again, you are going to find How We Love in just incredibly invaluable. They've also written How We Love Our Kids, which I also wish that they had written when I was still parenting, but I get to apply it to my relationship with my grandkids. But they travel and they speak extensively on relationships. Milan is a co-host. You may have heard him on radio. He's one of the co-hosts of the New Life Live, nationally syndicated radio show, heard over 180 radio stations. And they just celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. And yes, that is an accomplishment worth everything in our world. And they have 4 grown sons and daughters and 10 grandchildren. And I want you to give them a really, really, really warm welcome.
Hi there.
Hi, thank you for being here. We're so happy to be here with you, and
It's hard to believe 50 years has gone by of marriage. I remember my grandparents having their 50th and they look so ancient. And it's like, here we are. It's kind of hard to believe. But we're excited today to be with you and hope that this time will be a helpful time as you face your various life circumstances.
Yeah, I had to wake myself up after that exercise Deanna took us through. I mean, what a soothing voice she has, and it just took me to a place of, it was phenomenal, so thank you for sharing that. Philippians is a wonderful passage. If I might add to it for a moment, it tells us to cast our anxieties upon him, but then it tells us what our mind should be dwelling on as a substitute. Whatever's right, honorable, lovely. If there's anything worthy of praise, let your mind dwell on these things. So it's not just a vacuum, it's taking something and putting it this way and giving it up to the Lord, but also filling it with these incredible thoughts. Our specialty is attachment, the research that has gone into this thing called attachment, an infant who attaches to the mother, to the father. And this early attachment experience is a powerful implanting or imprinting of a relational set point within the child. How do I feel about relationship? Do I want to draw close to you because you're warm and inviting, or do I feel like you don't need me, therefore I need to just simply take care of myself? Or I'm not drawn to relationship, I'm kind of pushed away from a relationship. And what happens with these set points is they are set in such a way that they stay with us even through adulthood. So we could be adults, but we still have the similar set points that we had as children. Now, Philippians 1:9, since we're in the book of Philippians, says, "Let your love abound more and more." So he's saying, I want you to learn to love each other more and more in real knowledge and all discernment. Now, I love that because it's possible to try to love people without knowledge and discernment. And then we do what we think is loving, or we impose our love thoughts or feelings or desires on others. But here we are at a place where we can say, Kay and I, at a point in time 35 years ago, became much more knowledgeable and discerning when we studied attachment research. It's a 70-year-old field of research. Started in 1945 in England with John Bowlby, who began to watch what would happen to children who were put in hospitals during the war. At that particular time in England, the parent was not allowed to visit the child. So the child was abruptly taken from the parent and put in a hospital for whatever their ailment or injury was. And so they observed what happened to the child as they protested and then became despairing and depressed and then finally detached from the parents. And many of the parents were disappointed when they returned back to pick up the child because the child had disconnected from them and wasn't excited to see mom and dad anymore. And that was the beginning of what happens with closeness and distance, proximity, etc. So it's a very helpful area of study. What they discovered is they did some very specific studies, and they put a mom and a baby in a room and let them play and nurture and enjoy one another. Then they added stress to the relationship. They added a stranger to the room, which stressed the child at some level. And then after a few minutes, the mom would leave and leave the child in that room with the stranger. And in that case, the child would become distressed, would start to cry, and begin to exhibit a protest to the fact that they were left alone in this room. And then what happened was the mother would come back, and they observed these patterns over and over again. What did the child do when the parent came back? And they were different. Many of the responses were different. We're going to explain some of those to you in a few moments. Kay, tell us about the one positive style that was observed.
Well, what they observed was there was one positive style, that's called the secure connector, And in that situation, when the stranger came in the room, the baby noticed right away, and the toddler really, these are kids pre-verbal, under 2 years old, would move closer to the mother and kind of watch her to see, is this person okay? And if the mom interacted positively with this stranger, then the baby would go back to playing and sometimes even interact with the stranger, or the toddler, I shouldn't keep saying babies. Then, when the mom left the room, the kids that were secure would protest. I remember when my son was that age and he would cry when I left, I thought I was doing something wrong as a mom, or he would be secure. And it's just the opposite. Usually a toddler will protest when a mom leaves because that's their little secure base. That's who they need to feel safe. And then when the mom returned, the kids who were secure would reach right up for comfort and were easily comforted by the mom, telling the researchers that they'd had many periods of comfort from their parents over the years and could settle down quite quickly. So what we're really looking at here is how these toddlers manage stress and how their moms interact with them in a way that either soothed the children or didn't soothe the children, noticed the distress or didn't notice the distress. And so this starts very, very early in a child's life.
So Kay, talk about the fact that what the mother did was regulate the child's discomfort.
Yes, really what kind of the psychological term for that is regulation. And all that means is that a child develops the ability to go from a distressed state to a calm state. And when you think about the first years of life, that just happens over and over and over again, and especially if you have a mom that's tuned into that child. So the more times that child is regulated, the better they get at doing it themselves. However, we know some kids are hard to regulate, hard to soothe right from the gate. And then if you have special needs, or then it's going to be a more difficult process.
So that would be the secure connector, the child that responds to the parent can soothe, there's enjoyment, there's delight,
right.
And they find comfort in connection, all right? Not all children do. And so they identified 5 other styles that were insecure attachment styles. And we'll explain them in detail in a few moments, but the avoider, the emotionally avoidant, more detached and distant, the pleaser, the caretaking, clingy type of a person, the vacillator, which in the literature is called the ambivalent and preoccupied. Our editors asked us to make up a word that kind of put those 2 words together, preoccupied and ambivalent. We came up with vacillator. And then the chaotic, disorganized home, which produces a controller and a victim type. So, Kay, before we describe all these, I think it'd be good to acknowledge some things here.
Yeah, we want to this is one lens to look through relationships. Mm-hmm. There's so many lenses. We're just giving you one today, and we want to acknowledge that there's many others. And we also want to add the idea that any kind of mental illness at any stage in a child's life or in your own life is going to make all this process of bonding and regulating more difficult, and we understand that. We also want to say from the get-go here, we are not here to blame parents. We only looked back for one reason, and that was to explain where we were stuck in our own relationships, where we were developed and where we were undeveloped. Mm-hmm. And we, for the first 15 years of marriage, didn't even have a definition or words for these things. We didn't really understand what the strengths and weaknesses relationally were because we had never looked back at our own family of origin to kind of say, what do we want to keep from those years and what was implanted that is harming and hurting our relationships now. So this is not about blaming parents.
Right.
It's just about explaining.
It is. And when we looked at our own core pattern and then that what happened when you put 2 of these insecure attachment styles together, it created a circular pattern that was not pleasant. And we, as Kay said, are not here to blame. But when we could look at it, Kay, it explained why we were having the difficulty in our relationship. And I'd like to suggest that those things are gone now because we worked really hard on them. So this is an area where we can all work and actually earn the secure attachment if we didn't start out there. These handles or these 5 words I gave you a moment ago are meant to be temporary definitions of your starting spot. Okay? They're not meant to be permanent handles on your life. Again, parents did the very best they could. And we just simply want, in most cases, and what we want you to do is take what's helpful to you today from what we say and discard what isn't helpful. And I want to start by saying, in my home growing up, immensely fearful environment. And so I grew up with tons of anxiety on the inside. My major struggle throughout my entire life and my adult life has been anxiety. And that was very hard to manage and deal with. And in many, many cases, it controlled me, and I didn't know how to control it or to grow out of it. One of the things of looking back allowed me to move forward. Kay has struggled with depression her whole life, a dysthymic condition where a low-grade depression her whole life. And so we all have these things inside of us. We all have these places where we don't work well, but we can grow and we can change. So, Kay, talk to us about the avoider.
Okay, well, just so you know, here's a chart we're not going to go through that chart, but it's there for you to look in more detail at the avoider, the pleaser, all these love styles. And then, unfortunately today, just time limit-wise, we don't have enough time to describe these in detail. But we want you to know it's there. If you're interested in understanding more, you can go to our website, howwelove.com, or the book, and it'll go into much more detail. But the avoider was my love style coming into marriage. I didn't know that, and I would have said my family background was fine, which is what all avoiders say. In this home, what's missing is the emotional attachment. My parents never asked me once, how did I feel about anything? Mm-hmm. In fact, if I showed feelings, I either got in trouble or made people very anxious. So avoiders just learn to shut down, not need, not feel, and be responsible and task-oriented. So what we want to focus on today is how each of these love styles manage stress. Now you can imagine, what does an avoider do when they're stressed? What do you think, you avoiders?
Okay,
what do you do?
Wait. The avoiders aren't going to answer
they
that.
will. Yeah, they will.
The other people have to answer it for the avoiders.
What do your avoider friends and spouses do when you're stressed? They avoid. They detach. They want to quickly fix something and make it go away as quickly as possible. We didn't deal with conflict constructively in my home growing up, so I didn't have any conflict resolution skills. So avoiders tend to detach. As people, they're independent, they're self-sufficient, and they're low in empathy. Why are they low in empathy? Because I don't have memories of comfort from my childhood years. Someone has to see you're distressed and approach you, talk to you, acknowledge it, acknowledge the feelings behind that distress, and help you through it in order to feel comfort. Avoiders don't have those kinds of memories. So the avoiders are independent, self-sufficient, and low in empathy. Like we said with stress, they detach, they flee either internally or externally, and they're especially undone with strong feelings in other people, because they're just like, just stop it. And just take care of yourself, just like I do. Why do you need me? Conflict, they tend to avoid, minimize it, and try and stay away from it. If you push them into a corner, they may get angry and really push back, but they have to be very pushed into a corner before they get angry, for most avoiders. Growth simple, we're going to give you a couple simple growth steps. I had to learn to use the soul words list, which is also in your packet. I had no words for feelings. If you don't know what you feel, you don't know what you need. So the simple task, it was not simple because it went against everything that I learned growing up. But learning to name, identify, and share feelings gave me the accessibility to see them in other people, and then share other people sharing with me and me with them. That only took about 1.5 years. And I say that because I don't want you to think this is just an overnight fix. Learning to receive comfort and empathy and compassion from others was very uncomfortable and awkward. But I kept at it because I thought, if Jesus was sitting here right now, he would want to comfort me, and I'm so uncomfortable with that idea, or him offering that. And so receiving comfort and learning to then give comfort after you learn to value it is an important part of an avoider's growth.
Now, she's no longer an avoider, okay? We classically stereotype that as male, but this is not about gender. All of these can apply to any gender, and I used to be the pleaser. The caretaker, keep the peace, appease. So what pleasers do with stress is they freeze because they don't know what to do. They just freeze. They literally can do nothing for a little while. Then they try to appease and fix whatever's going on to make it all go away really, really quick. When they're conflicted or they find themselves, in conflict, they're afraid of conflict. They don't want to be in conflict because conflict is separating, if you will. They don't want separation. So they'll give in, make nice, they will minimize, and they'll also lie to avoid disruptions. What do I mean by that? They'll really minimize things, and they'll say, oh, I'm fine, everything's okay, and they'll smile when they tell you that, because they want you to think everything's okay. And so if you're okay, then they're okay. Does that make sense? Okay. Growth means I have to stop managing everybody else's feelings. Stop managing everybody else's feelings. I had to tell the truth, and I had to learn to stand up for myself, and I had to learn to tolerate separation, that it was okay, I wasn't going to die. In my home as a child, I thought I was going to die if there was separation. And then I had to realize conflict is unavoidable. But if you can imagine that Kay was avoidant, and here's Milan, kind of wanting to be as close as possible.
And I'm kind of like,
And what do you think she's going to do? Yeah, she's going to blast off, and here I am dancing with myself over here, and I had to learn that was okay to be able to do that. Kay,
and I had to learn to come close.
Yeah, I had to learn to step away, and she had to learn to move this way.
Different.
Sanctification journeys. I knew what you were going to say.
Yeah, you know me pretty well.
Talk about the vacillator.
Okay. The vacillator usually comes from a childhood home where there's some really good connection, but it's unpredictable, and sometimes more based on the parent's availability or mood than when the child really needs it. So avoiders detach, they flee. This is, you learned in high school psychology maybe, the fight, flight, freeze. Avoiders detach, flee, pleasers freeze, and vacillators protest, they fight. Why are they protesting? They're protesting lack of ideal. They don't feel like they have enough connection. They don't realize that that's an historical feeling. And they feel like if you could do it right, they would always feel much better, so they tend to look at you as the problem. They crave the attention that they didn't get as kids, the consistent attention, and they have a lot of abandonment fears. And almost the home of every vacillator, there's either blatant abandonment or there's abandonment where the parent is home, but they're just disengaged. There's no real connection or very rare connection between the parent and the child. They protest the lack of ideal, and they're disappointed a lot because if they could get everything to be ideal, then they would never be upset or hurt or angry. So they're always striving for the ideal, and therefore they're always disappointed and letting other people know how disappointed they are, which doesn't make for connection and relationships. So you can see how all of these cause conflict. Avoiders cause conflict because they don't engage. Pleasers cause conflict not because they're conflictual or that they're picking fights, but they minimize, and that's frustrating to people. Vacillators are always upset and telling you what you're doing wrong, and that causes conflict as well. So what do we have to do to grow over the vacillator? You have to realize that your anger is fueled by a ton of anxiety that builds and builds and builds. And when it gets to a certain level, you pop, and that's when you're angry, and then you feel better. But guess what? Nobody else feels better. But they're not going to tell you that because they don't want to get the whole cycle going again. So for the vacillator, they really do need to learn to realize that they need help with the anxiety. Vacillators don't like to ask for help. They want you to just love them enough to magically know what they need at any given moment. So when you ask the vacillator, ask directly for what you want. I'm really anxious right now, I need a hug. They're very resistive because it spoils it if you have to ask. Somehow you should just know if you love them enough. Let's see, forget anything? Learn to listen without interrupting. Vacillators are just as hard on themselves internally as they are on other people, and they have private moments of beating themselves up, which I call the shame pit. No one knows about these things, they're very private, but it's a place of tremendous pain for the vacillator where they really need comfort, and they're unable to receive it because they're unable to tell other people what's really in their head.
Yeah, one of the biggest places of hurt inside is shame. And so when some things don't happen correctly, or they don't feel seen, or things aren't happening ideally, and somehow they're implicated, they feel deep levels of shame. And that comes from the child who's been abandoned. There must be something wrong with me. And so we really have to look back and identify and empathize with that loss. How many of you ever, just now don't point at anybody, but how many of you have ever seen an avoidant person before? The avoider. Raise your hand. Okay, thank you. Avoiders did not raise their hands on that one, I know. Everybody else did, because they're sitting next to them. How many of you ever seen that caretaking, codependent pleaser? Raise your hand. If you've seen one, don't point. How many of you seen the vacillator who is, good, I don't have to explain who they are, you're raising your hands. Got it. There's another category, and these were the original 3 that were developed by the early attachment researchers. But then a researcher by the name of Mary Main, University of California, said there's another category, and this is a category of chaotic and disorganized, where the child grows up in a home that is dangerous, where the parent is not a parent but is supposed to be a provider, but is also a person who creates fright and fear in the child, in some cases abuse and hurt. The professor at UC said, the child is trapped in a place where there is fright without solutions. I can't do anything about it as a child. I'm frightened, but I have no solutions. So some of these kids grow up and they become angry at what happened to them, and they're angry at the humiliation, the shame, the abuse, and neglect, and all of the hostility that was a part of that home. And in those homes often contain drug addiction, often contain various other addictions and abusive behaviors. All right, one kid grows up out of this home, and they get angry, and they decide to fight back. And we've had people in our offices who have left their houses at 14 years old, 13, 14 years old, 15, 16. They learn to live on the street, and there's only 3 things in a day that they need to accomplish. I need some money, I need to put food in my mouth, and I need to find a place to sleep. And so they are very day-to-day people, because I have the same goal every single day, survival. And that is what I need to do. When they are stressed, they feel threatened. If you stress them, they will feel threatened and they will get angry at you. And in conflict, they will use intimidation, severe intimidation in many cases, anger, it's my way or the highway, and they need to win because they do not want to be in this place where they have been humiliated and hurt and shamed again, so they want to take the up position. They will be in charge and the whole world operates the way I want it. That way, nothing unpredictable happens, and I don't have to be anxious, all right? Growth. And this is one of the hardest things for people from chaotic, disorganized homes, Kay, is they have to acknowledge the childhood wounds that they incurred. They hate looking back. They don't want to look at their childhood. They believe it's over, but it is not over. It is running their life every single day. If you don't deal with trauma, it will continue to be very prevalent and it will run your life. It is driving the bus. You're not. Until we get to the point where we understand that, and it is so hard. They need to learn to grieve that loss. those wounds. They need to learn, as you said earlier, to receive compassion and comfort. I remember a guy in your office that you reported to me who said, "Stop crying when I tell you these stories." And Kay said, "Look, I used to be an avoider. I worked hard to get these tears back, and I'm going to use them because what you told me is grievous to my soul." Amen is right. Right. That's my wife. Yeah. And you need to notice the fear you cause in other people and realize you frighten people. We had a guy who studied our material, How We Love, the book, was in a group, and he said, I finally one day saw fear in my children's eyes. And he said, that grieved my spirit. And he said, it made me want to change because I knew what fear felt like, but I was causing it in them. And he had experienced a massive change in his relationship with his family. It was something that when we talk to him today, he still cries about when we talk to him today. Kay, talk about the victim.
I want to say one more thing about that guy. He didn't see the fear for years.
That's right.
Because he wasn't connected to his own fear.
Mm-hmm.
He had wiped out all his memories and just, yeah, it was hard, or it was, this is what people with trauma do. They just tell you it wasn't that bad, and then you start hearing details, and you're like, that's bad. So the victim is just the opposite. They're the ones that stay under the radar and try and just hide when these kind of traumatic things happen in their homes. They deal with their adult life, and by just trying to, again, stay under the radar. I always say that victims learn to tolerate the intolerable. And so the intolerable is quite normal to them, which is many times why you see them taking a lot of abuse from others. In more extreme cases, they learn to dissociate, which means they're really not present. And in conflict, they just feel powerless and trapped and unable to protect themselves or their kids. So for both of these groups, and especially for the victim, the first goal is safety. You cannot grow in an atmosphere where you feel frightened and afraid all the time. So that can mean different things. We don't have the time to go into this, but safety is the first goal. And then again, dealing with the childhood pain. For all of these styles, there's many times unresolved wounds. But if you've had trauma, I can almost guarantee you, if you have never dealt with it, your wounds have never been listened to, you've never told the stories, you've never seen compassion or tears in someone's eyes, you've never gotten a hug for what you went through. And those are the things that heal. I'm going to say one more thing, it's not in our notes, but I just feel led to say it. None of these styles grieve well. And if you're dealing with mental illness, grief is important. If you're caretaking someone with mental illness, grief is important. God gave us our tears as a way to release enormous amounts of stress, and they literally you have stress hormones in your tears. Not if you cut an onion, but there's stress hormones in emotional tears. Avoiders obviously don't cry. I learned not to cry before I was 5 years old. Pleasers are so worried that you're not okay, they don't know how to cry for themselves. They'll cry for you, but they won't cry for themselves. Vacillators just get mad, and it takes, when I see a vacillator start to begin to cry, it's a huge growth step because they're less anxious and less angry. Controllers and victims, so many of them say, well, why cry? It doesn't do any good. It's just a waste of time. And they haven't really felt the release that can come from learning to really shed those tears. Okay, so.
If you combine, Kay, any of these 2 or 5 types, in our book there are 9 core patterns of various arrangements of combining these. Highly predictable. People say, how do you know we do that? And we'll say, well, you're in this part of our book right here. Why? Because human beings aren't that inventive. We tend to do very similar things, especially in the style of these wounded attachment styles. Again, this is not a permanent definition of who you are. if you choose to change it, you can become the secure connector. And if we didn't learn security as a child, we can earn it as an adult, which is what we did. I'm no longer the pleaser. She's no longer the avoider. We are very, very different. Now, let's talk about triggers for a moment. When I was a little boy, Trigger was the name of the horse that Roy Rogers rode. So we're not talking about that horse. I understand he's stuffed and in a museum in Branson, Missouri or something like that. All right, we're not talking about trigger. A trigger escalates conflict. If you are triggered, you will find that at any conflict you have, if you add the trigger, you will escalate exponentially everything that is happening in the room. Now, we were asked to talk about attachment and in the midst of conflict. And that is why we're couching all of this in the conflict arena, because we're trying to look for ways to reduce conflict between all of us. And if we can have a new lens to look at ourselves and be honest about ourselves and our behavior, that's important. Okay, what's a trigger? We're triggered, here's the short, watch my hands. Something happens right here in the present. And it reminds me of something historical back here, okay? And what happens when I'm triggered, this current event, this historical feeling state, not just cognitive thinking, but a feeling state, body feelings, body sensations, and body reactions of fight, flight, and freeze, slam themselves into the present day situation, which takes that situation and exponentially lifts it up here. And so we find ourselves in an exaggerated response where the response is bigger than the infraction. When that is happening, history is involved. One of my radio colleagues, Dr. Sherry Keffer, said she doesn't know where she got it from. We talked about it, but the phrase, if it's hysterical, it's historical. And it's catchy and a bit humorous, but it's not funny. It's not funny because these historical places of pain and trauma will stick with you until you choose to work on them and deal with them and allow them to be released and diffused and diminished in our lives. Kay, would you add anything to that?
No, but we're going to give you an exercise right now to help you identify some triggers.
Right, so get ready.
So get a pencil and paper out. I know there's a blank page at the end of your packet there.
Well, actually, there's room on
Oh, yeah, right. You can do it right on the sheet there.
right on your sheet at point number 6.
So we want you to pick someone with whom you have a close relationship who repetitively irritates you. That's not hard, is it?
Now, wait a minute. Don't point. Don't point.
So they irritate you, they hurt you, they make you upset. In other words, they stress you out in the same way over and over again. What behaviors, moods, words, or reactions in this person cause you trouble? So you're going to pick a person and you're going to say, when they do A, B, and C, or they just do A, I really get bugged. Now, when Milan said it's an exaggerated response, it could be a very quiet. I didn't get loud, I got more and more detached and distant. All right, so we'll get to the response in a minute. But first of all, one person, what did they do that really annoys you, upsets you, hurts you, causes you trouble over and over? And try and be as specific as you can be.
Now, don't look at each other's paper, please.
What's our time limit? How much do we have?
About 8 minutes left.
Okay, then I want you to look at the list of soul words also in your packet. And I want you to pick 3 words off that list. And if you're an avoider, guess of what goes on inside you when this person does whatever it is. And try and use more than one category. We like to just stick with one category. But make your best guess, or you might know exactly 3 feeling words. And look all the way down the list so that you're able to access the whole list of words. And you can check them, circle them, it doesn't matter. It's just we want you to be aware that whether you know it or not, this person does cause feelings inside of you and probably responses in your body. Okay, next question. I want you to think about, maybe you have said this to this person, and maybe you said it over and over, but what is your response? If you've been quiet or you have trouble saying something, what is it in your head that you would want to say? And don't make it pretty. Don't pretty it up, because it's only between you and the Lord right now. What would you want to say to this person if you don't say anything? Or what have you already said about how you feel irritated or upset or hurt? And pick 2 or 3 words. Or phrases or things if you could write them a letter and they would never read it and you just laid it all out, what would you be saying? When you do this, I feel this, and man, here's what I really want to say to you. Okay, so now I want you to just, in your mind's eye, I want you to turn around and look historically. Parents, siblings, teachers, could be inside the home, could be outside the home. Who do you want to say those exact same words to? Who is it that gives you the exact same feelings if you look backwards in time? It could possibly be even former relationships as an adult, but if you have a childhood memory, that's even more significant. Who in your history made you feel this way? Who in your history do you want to say these words to? Maybe you've said them to the people in your history, maybe you haven't. Whom gives you that same cluster of feelings? Who is it in your history that you could say, yeah, they made me feel those same 3 feelings that I just wrote down? And if you're really drawing a blank, I would suggest that you really at least pray and ask the Lord, is there something that is there that I just don't remember or I'm not seeing? Most all of us have some triggers, even just from our own attachment style. My mom was highly anxious, so when he got anxious, and he didn't even call it anxiety, I just could feel it. And what did I do? I did the same thing I did with my mom. I just sort of moseyed on over here so I don't have to feel that anxiety. I didn't know I was doing that. I didn't know it was a trigger. It was a very quiet response. But I would definitely detach. I got an email from a lady this week. She said, second marriage, my husband had a very hard dad, lots of trauma, and he is really trying, but he talks in a mean tone to my 12-year-old son. And I get so mad, I want to scream. In fact, I'm starting to hate this guy. I resent him so much. And then at the very bottom she put, my mom was really loud and hard, and my siblings got it worse than I did. And I was like, oh. Who does she really want to scream at? Her husband is got a mean tone, and she says, I'm just quiet. What can you do? She's still the little girl. Mom's got a tone. Mom's screaming at her or the other kids in a mean way, and what does she do? She just gets quiet. So her current second husband is getting all the fuel and all the anger that belongs at least a good deal historically. And that's what I told her to look at when I answered the email.
How many of you are triggered by tones? Raise your hand.
Tones,
By
voice tones.
Somebody's tone triggers you. Look at all those hands going up. Odds are that's historical. It's not just the person who does that. Now, that doesn't mean that the person in the present can't work on modifying their behavior to be more careful not to trigger you, which is what I did to Kay, because I realized that if I was overbearing to her, it would start to trigger her. So I learned to have conversations with Kay like this. I'd say, so, Kay, what's going on today? She's over there, I'm here, my back is turned, sort of the averted gaze horse whisperer, It works. I've done this in my office with triggered patients and clients. I would sit down and I'd say, boy, something hurts inside. Anything you want to tell me about that? So I had to learn to work on my behavior while we were working on the historical healing, and to be able to say to one another, I will love you enough that I can take care of you by being careful what I do.
How many of you, oh, sorry.
No, that's okay, go ahead.
How many of you saw a connect between what you feel now and your history? Quite a
Okay.
few of you.
Yeah, look around, see all the hands that are up.
Now there's going to be a few of you that go, no, that never ever happened to me as a child. Well, that's significant too, because how are you supposed to have the skills to deal with that? We worked with a guy who said, well, my wife tells me what to do and I get really upset. Well, when we looked at his history, his mom and his grandma spoiled him rotten, never told him no one time. The dad was out of the picture. He had never heard no, or I disagree with you, until he got married. Literally.
That's a bummer if you're the wife, right?
Yeah.
And
So it was a different kind of trigger. It was like he was put in a situation where he had to learn that, oh, guess what? In the real world, people will disagree with you, even though mama and grandma gave you everything you wanted. And when the mom finally said no, the grandma went in behind her back and gave him whatever he wanted.
guess what his profession was? Policeman.
Careful.
Nobody says no to a policeman, right? Perfect job for him. Now, I would sit
We
here...
are not saying
No,
that
we're
all
not saying-
policemen have
no.
that experience and they're all, no, we're
I
not.
love policemen, don't get me wrong. Now, so I would be sitting here on the floor like this, with the averted gaze, and guess what? I'd ask Kay a question, and because she's an introvert, sometimes, and I had to learn to be patient, sometimes I would wait for a half hour, 15 minutes, 10
Not a
minutes.
half an hour. No.
Yeah, you're right, it was an hour. But she would really want to think about what the answer was.
I didn't even know the answer half the time. I'm like, oh, I never thought of that.
Right. So, but I would give her patience and let her come back when she wanted to and tell me the answer. So I had to work on me and regulating myself. Now, look, there's a lot of stuff here that we could spend time on, but would you note that we're talking in your notes about what you do when you're triggered, and there's some guidelines for you. Deal with the wounds fueling the triggers, acknowledge their impact, grieve and accept comfort and forgive. Remember that the person you're dealing with is that you're interacting with is not causing all those feelings. If you lash out at them and they become the lightning rod, as Kay said earlier, for all those historical feelings, that's a disproportionate amount of retaliation. Determine the skills you're missing to stay more engaged, like I just demonstrated to you. And tell someone who's triggering you, you know what, I'm getting triggered, I need help. And to ask them to meet you there in that place. I'm getting triggered, give me a few minutes to collect myself, and then Kay's going to talk to you about some self-soothing tools.
Okay, so we're going to go through these quickly because we're really out of time, but pay attention to your tipping point. Oh, keep going? Okay, all right. Well, what I would say then add to what Milan just said about how do you deal with triggers is you've got to do it with other people. If you're married, we try and get the spouses to start to listen to each other's histories, and we have a whole workbook that goes with how we love to help you do this. There's also a private couple study on the website you can do, so that I didn't understand him until I heard his history. I didn't really have any compassion until I heard his history. And then I was like, oh my gosh, that happened to you when you were growing up? That's horrible. No wonder you chase me around. No wonder you're asking me, how are you, 5 times a day. All of a sudden, everything made sense. So if you're single, you can do it with a group of people, because your triggers will happen at work, they'll happen in friendships. It's not just marriage, but the closer you are, the more the attachment wounds come to the surface.
Yeah, primary attachments, when you connect strongly with someone, is when they flare up.
Okay, so the first way we want to self-soothe is notice that we're getting stressed. Everyone has a stress response. It could be what your attachment style says, detaching. He is a pleaser, cleaned when he was stressed. I didn't know for the first 15 years of our marriage that he started cleaning Sunday night because he was stressed about Monday. I was just like, why are you doing this right now? You're already tired and you're kind of in a bad mood. Why are you tearing the garage apart? And when I realized he cleaned as a little boy to win back an angry mom, oh, you're still doing it. That was a time to offer comfort, but I had to know it was a stress response first. So think about, what is your stress response? What are your kids? What are your friends? What is their stress response?
Sometimes she'd let me finish the whole task before she'd comfort me.
Yeah. Especially if it was the
because she
kitchen.
knew I'd get it done, you know. I'm kidding.
I'll ask couples to notice in each other, what does your husband do when he gets stressed? Oh, his jaw starts twitching. That's a sign he's not okay. So, body language, what happens? Second, breathing. Deanna, thank you for already taking us through that. We were going to do the exact same exercise. What breathing does is it tells your amygdala, which fuels all this stuff in your brain.
The fight, flight, freeze.
You don't have to fight or flight right now. Everything's okay. Breathing calms everything down. Don't dismiss it as though that's dumb. It really works, but it takes practice. If you put, during therapy, a pulse monitor on an avoider, his heartbeat will shoot, or her heartbeat will shoot up to 100, 115 when they're upset, and they'll look as calm as a cucumber. Looks like nothing's wrong at all. And they've learned to completely ignore their body, because we're not going to feel, we're not going to deal, so I don't know, I don't feel it. But you've got to understand, your body will tell you when something's wrong, but you have to learn to listen. If you feel you're in a situation and you get triggered, ask for, you know what, I need to use the bathroom, I'll be right back. Or I'm so thirsty, I need to go get a glass of water. And then breathe when you go do that. And remind yourself, I'm not little anymore, this isn't my dad, this isn't my mom, whatever, whoever it is. I'm going to try and stay present, I'm going to try and stay engaged. Just buy yourself a little time. If you have to have a difficult conversation, suggest a walk. Any kind of rhythmic activity also calms down the amygdala. Just walking what do we do with babies? We walk them, don't we? Because it calms down our whole system. And then learn to empathize with a person. I mean, when someone's dysregulated, that means they're stressed, and that means they're not looking good or acting good very well. And we want to say, well, what's wrong with you today? Or you're sure in a bad mood. Instead of saying, wow, you really seem like you're not okay. How can I help? What's going on? What are you feeling? Try and empathize before you fix or, in fact, listen, learn to listen. We didn't know how to listen at all. You want to finish those up, since I just did one of yours?
That's okay, they're ours. So, yeah, even if you see someone beginning to be dysregulated, if you can say to them, I see how upset you are, it'll help me to listen if you would just, let's do some breathing together and create some space so we can settle ourselves into a position where we can talk. Whatever you do, don't tell somebody, now calm down. That doesn't work.
That can be a trigger right there.
Yeah. I want to understand, can we slow down a bit so that I could better understand what it is you're trying to say? We were in another country. We were there for a week-long family conference, and I had spoken at the Sunday services, and I didn't know that one of the persons in the audience was very upset at something I said. But we were invited over to dinner the next day to their house, and there was a small group of people. And what I didn't realize, it was a setup, to get me captured so I could be told what was wrong. So we had just had dinner, and we were sitting together, and then all of a sudden, this person rose up and said, I've got a bone to pick with you. And all of a sudden, I got so triggered right then. This is 13 years ago or something like that. I was so triggered at the suddenness, the surprise, the atmosphere that had been set prior, and then the sudden switch, which was my home. And I couldn't breathe. So we're sitting together, and I went like this to Kay. Where's your leg? There it is. I tapped her on the leg like that, and because
I knew.
She knew. And I let her, Kay started talking,
Yeah.
and began to fill in, well, what was it that was the problem, and et cetera, and began to pull the person out. Meanwhile, I'm doing this breathing that Deanna took us through a little while ago, and telling myself, this isn't my home. I'm not a little child anymore. I'm not powerless, but it was like a sucker punch. It was shocking how powerful it was. She gave me the space so I could recover enough to finally engage in the conversation and be regulated again.
Yeah. And at the end of an hour and a half, they invited us to go somewhere else, and we said, no, thank you.
No, thanks.
But thanks for dinner.
But this is really important, and I just want to talk about right brain to right brain discussions for a moment. That when a person is triggered, or just has strong feelings, or is emotional, it is absolutely fruitless to try to talk logic to their left brain.
To their right brain.
No, to their left brain logic. It's fruitless to do that. But if you empathize and you talk to the right brain conversation looks like some of these statements. Tell me what's going on inside. I can tell you're upset. I can tell something hurt you, scared you. Something really did something inside of you. Tell me what's there. Something hurts. Tell me how you feel. Then we can actually connect with someone, which is what Kay and I learned to do. And as a result, we were able to lower the reactivity in our home. She's no longer an avoider. I'm no longer a pleaser. We're both more secure. We're still sinners saved by grace.
And we don't
God's
have
not
like a
done with us
perfect
yet.
relationship. It's never perfect this side of heaven.
Right.
It's just we have tools to manage stress that we didn't have before.
That's right.
And conflict.
So we hope this gives you some tools, and we look forward to being with you again in
And
the
I think
future.
we're going to do some questions and answers after your table talk. So we'll be available for questions in a little bit.
So am I correct, Todd and Kay, in saying the table discussions now, there they are?
And if you're alone at a table, please join someone else if you would like, so that you can discuss.
Yeah, all right. Talk amongst yourselves.
Awesome. All right. Well, do you want to start, Kay?
Sure, I'll be glad to start. Did you introduce yourself, by the way?
Oh, yeah, I'm Pastor Todd Olthoff, pastor of Pastoral Care and Mental Health Initiative here at Saddleback. So great to be with you.
Yes. So you talked, so many things, but you talked toward the end about in trying to build empathy or compassion for somebody that you're in conflict with or you're just getting to know is to know their story. So in one sense, that sounds very simple, tell me your story. So is there more to it than that? Is it really just that simple? Or give us some tips on encouraging somebody to really tell their story.
Well, even if someone can't tell their story and I observe some behavior that's really difficult, my first thought is, wow, I wonder what happened to them growing up. And so you can't always hear the story, but I think, just even, I've worked with some people that I knew at least a little bit, just to say, I feel like maybe there's something in your history that I'm tripping on, because it feels like you get really upset if I don't call you every day or something like that, So I think just, a few sentences of wonderment, or curiosity is, I think, the key. To be curious about what maybe is inside other people that you have no idea. What would you add to that?
Yeah, not to react at the first thing you hear, just to take the time and stop. And I do this a lot with people, and I do it a lot in conversations. I do it on the radio. Is I'll stop and say, now what prompts that question, or where's that response I see coming from? Tell me more about what you're feeling right now, or what's the backstory on what I'm seeing right now, and to try to empathize. But if a person is really in a very highly reactive state, we can assume that history's involved. There was a gal at a restaurant, and she was infuriated at something. Somebody had shushed her and told her to be quiet. And she got up, and she was just brawling with the man who told her, to shush, because she was too loud.
And she was loud.
And she was very loud. But then she ended up pulling her chair up next to me, a chair. And I'm saying, Lord, I'm off duty tonight. I don't want to work tonight. And she put her chair next to me, and she was yelling at this man. And I said, okay, Lord, I guess I'm not off duty. So literally her hair was touching my sleeve. And she had her back to me. And I said to her, who shushed you when you were a little girl? And she turned around, and I had my hand like this because I didn't want to catch a flying elbow in the face, and I wanted to make sure. And she turned around, she goes, who in the blanky blank are you? And I said, my name's Milan, I'm a counselor, but somebody hurt you really bad. And somebody shushed you, and it hurt. And that man shushing you tonight really pulled up something. And she started crying. And it was one of those powerful moments, one of those things that God says, I want you to be involved in something that you're not expecting. And to just stop and not react to the first thing you see, but imagine there's a history there, because we all have histories.
So because I want to take it down to the super personal level, you weren't emotionally engaged. In other words, she wasn't yelling at you. And you were a bystander, if you will, to her meltdown, to her pain, her expression of hurt and trauma.
Right.
So what if it's in a personal relationship, and both of you have something invested, and you want to hear, maybe you recognize that the person is reacting in a way that, as you said, is way not appropriate to the situation. How do you ask that without sounding like a therapist, in interpersonal relationships, not therapist-client, but two people?
Yeah.
How do you learn somebody else's story without trying to be their therapist?
Well, the first thing is, if I am dysregulated, I can't help regulate anybody else.
Do you want to define those two terms quickly?
Yes. To be regulated means I am present in the moment. Keyword present. I can be here, observant, watching, and then my emotions are not taking me to a place where I'm no longer in control. All right? So a dysregulated person cannot help another dysregulated person. So, Kay, the answer to that question is, first, I can only be responsible for me. And in so doing, as I did in that situation we were talking about, I had to ask her to give me a buffer time so I could kind of regain my ground. But it is all, she didn't know who I was when I simply said, something hurt you. And so if it's a personal, interpersonal thing where we're both invested, I will say to them, boy, something I just said really hurt you or scared you or did something. Tell me what I did that made you feel not good on the inside. And I'll simply say, I'll take the responsibility and say something I did, and I won't use the word trigger, I won't use any words like that. I'll just say something I said really did something. Tell me what happened. I want to know.
That's good. That's good, because I think that that's where we all live, is in interpersonal
Yeah.
relationships.
Well, that's exactly right.
Yep. And we need to be able to talk to each other and hear each other's story without putting ourselves in that place of, I'm observing in you that you are upset, which sounds very clinical, doesn't go over well usually, but just that warmth. I said something, did something that was bruised. I think that's great.
Yeah.
Great advice.
Would you add to that, sweetie?
No, I agree with what you're saying. I think, but sometimes if you're not doing well, you're not going to be able to say that.
Right.
And I think just to be able to say, I really want to listen, and I just need a few minutes to collect myself so I can be a good listener, can really calm down another person, and then come back. Just say, I'll be back in 5 minutes or 10 minutes, or let me take a walk around the block, and then we'll have a talk. Because then you both have time to calm down, but take responsibility for where you're at and ask for time if you need it, but don't just escape. Tell them when you're coming back and then be there. And sometimes no matter how you say it, people say, well, you sound like a therapist. And I'm like, I'm just trying to hear your heart. So if you want to share, that's great. If you don't, that's up to you.
Yeah, people have stigmatized emotions. But our God is a very emotionally intelligent God. Every emotion from Genesis to Revelation, God displays. And he tells us why it's there and what he's going to do about it, or some variation of that. So we are emotional creatures, and we have to acknowledge that. God is cognitive and he's emotional. And so we are too, because we're made in his image and likeness. So to be able to say, I hurt you, tell me more about what I did.
In that same vein, how helpful is it to help someone identify their emotions? In other words, so if someone's dysregulated and you're trying to engage with them, is it good to go in and help them identify what those emotions are? Is it just to listen? Is there, a process to that?
I think it depends on what kind of state they're in. I mean, there's a point where nothing good is going to happen from this point on. And even just to say, gosh, we've kind of been in this circle before, and this is where everything goes downhill, and I don't want it to go downhill. So let's take I know I need a couple minutes, or I need a half an hour to come back and try again. But again, it's taking responsibility, because I always ask couples in my office, when did you know this fight was going to go nowhere? And they're like, about 15 minutes ago. And I was just sitting here wondering if you were going to stop yourselves or you're just going to keep going and spend your whole time, arguing in the same old pattern you've kept doing it. Let's try something new. Let's have a redo. And I think that can be very helpful. But eventually, if someone's angry, there's usually feelings under that anger. And if a person's willing to try and explore that, it can be helpful. I can't tell you how many couples have, I got another email recently. We did the comfort circle, and I asked my husband, who's an avoider, how do you feel when I'm angry? And he said, I feel unimportant and overlooked, and I feel hopeless. And she was shocked because she had no idea he was feeling any of that. But he was able to put words to that because he was looking at a soul words list. And it really impacted her. So if it's possible and two people are able to go there, I think it can be super helpful.
And so, Todd, I'll also maybe put forth a couple of 3 emotions that are common and prevalent. Most people respond, I'm mad, I'm sad, I'm frightened, or I'm very anxious. Mad, sad, glad, afraid, just simple words. And you can do that with kids. To be able to say, you're feeling something, of what might that be, and to invite the conversation. And because I think one of the things we want to learn to do as Christians especially is to elevate our conversations and elevate the people around us.
You answered started one of the things I was going to ask is, I've heard you talk before of using the feelings word or soul word with children, but could you just give us, a few more sentences about how to apply that, how to start with your kids at a young age? What if they're like teenagers, and how do you introduce that again without, oh, you guys are just trying to cycle, how do you introduce that into your family and make that a regular practice?
Well, when they're really small, just to name what they're feeling. Wow, you're really mad right now, or you're really sad right now, and it's okay to be mad, but you still can't have the cookie. I mean, so naming them at first, and then as time goes on, trying to help them connect that feeling with a need. Let's see if we can have the cookie after dinner. I'll put it right here and save it for you. But connecting feelings to needs, maybe you just need a hug right now. Maybe that would help you feel better. Or, maybe we just need to go down to the playground for a while. Or just helping them realize that they can do something with unpleasant emotions to help themselves feel better. And then, we started this when our own kids were in high school and junior high, and Kelly was still very young. And they're like, I'm not going to do that stupid feeling thing.
Yeah, they would say, Dad, that's so
Yeah,
stupid.
so dumb.
So stupid.
But yet,
That was a feeling word.
yeah, stupid, right. But we also knew that, I remember one time and specifically with our older son, he would get really testy and irritable and make everybody's life miserable when he wasn't okay. And we just said, well, you're not going to get the car keys until we have the talk. So it's fine if you want to wait till 10 minutes, a half an hour, tomorrow, next month, no car keys until we have the talk. And he started out so mad. And we just said, we just want to understand, we're going to pick church, school, different areas of your life, and what's going on that's stressful in those areas. What's going on in sports? What's going on with your friends? And, I'll talk about what's stressing me. And then later on, we're like, well, is there a feeling that goes with that? And in 35 minutes, he was crying, and he's 17 years old. I didn't know there were so many stressful things. No wonder I feel so grumpy. And, we were kind of shocked ourselves, and I think he was shocked. So sometimes you just have to insist when you get a lot of pushback. But I've seen 3-year-olds have amazing empathy and compassion for strangers who are feeling sad because someone has had empathy for them. And they want to know, why is that person sad, and what can we do to help them? 3-year-olds.
Yeah, I had a psychologist say to me one day, but Milan, that behavior is so invasive, to be so insistive. And but I said, but I am a parent, and I'm responsible to help my kids. And I believe in bribery. You want to use the car? Let's do a little quid pro quo here. That's what the world is all about. And so, give me some feelings, you get the keys. And it works, and because God has requirements of us. You do this, I'll reward you with that. I'll bless you with this and that. If you don't, I won't. And so it's something that we're supposed to do. So it's a challenge, Kay, because kids will be resistive. But if you do it lovingly and just say, look, we care. We can tell you're stressed. But let's be really clear about it. We want to teach you what the feelings are that you're going through.
And I would imagine the more, at least I found this true in our home, that the more Rick and I were honest and used feeling words, and didn't just react or respond or behave in a way, if we actually put words about how that made me feel or what I'm feeling in a moment, then it becomes easier for kids to...
You're modeling it.
Yeah, we're modeling it, and then they hear it, and it's not so strange. It's like, this is the way we talk in our family. We talk about feelings.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
You're modeling it as a parent.
Yeah.
And it's never too late to start, even with adult kids. You know? Gosh, I just read this book, and I'm a total avoider, and I'm wondering how that was for you growing up. They can be grown, and you can still have conversations about deeper things.
Todd, before you say the next question, remember to write down a question. We have time to, if you have a specific question, be sure to write down, and the volunteers will be walking through. You can just hold them up.
You can
They'll
hold
come
it up and
collect
they'll come
them
grab
for
them.
you as we keep talking, so we'll be glad to
They'll
take
grab
your
them from
questions.
you. Yeah, I was just going to make a comment that even labeling the emotions helps regulate. You know, it takes the other part of your brain to kind of reflect on what's happening for you, and there's a regulation that happens there. So I've seen that quite a bit as well.
Would you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we're emotionally distressed and we have all of our emotions running high, a lot of times you don't know what you're feeling. So if you ask someone how they're feeling when they're upset, they're going to give you a bunch of statements about what's going on for them, but they don't know what they're feeling. Once you ask someone how they feel, and even reading a word list, right? I've got to engage my left brain to reflect on my right brain when I read. So there's just something regulating that happens when I'm trying to identify what I'm actually feeling. I'm actually self-reflecting. So I'm actually, doing the very thing that I need to do to regulate. So it's a really, really important thing. So I know everybody laughs when, therapists and everything say, what do you feel? But the reality is it's really strategic. It's really important that you do know what you feel. It's not just a cliche. It really does work. It works really well.
Guess why you make decisions? You make decisions primarily on emotions. What's interesting is they did research and where emotions were cut off and for some medical reason, and somebody did some research on this, I can't quote it, but they asked them to make a decision. They had cognitive capacity, but they couldn't make decisions well. And so we are a blend of cognitive and emotional with respect to making decisions. In addition to that, Todd, the ability to reflect back what you heard and validate, oh my goodness, from your perspective, I could see how you'd feel that way. That immediately lets the person know you see them and hear them. And it is a relief to them. They don't have to prosecute the case anymore. When you say, that's a great point.
Some good questions here. Trying to read quickly. One is super simple. What are your books and how do we order? Super easy.
The books are How We Love, and get the expanded version. That's the newest, 2018. There's an older one that is just got less information, and then How We Love Our Kids. And you can get them on Amazon or Christian Books or our website, wherever you want.
And we have them in the resources, correct?
No, we didn't have time to order them because we didn't know we
Oops.
could bring them. So I don't think there's. Do you have any back there? I don't think so. No.
Sorry. So you'll have to order them, but
You
they're
have to order
easily
them, yeah.
to get.
But easy to order. And the workbook
Is the third book.
is the third book,
yeah.
and it's all the application for the book.
And where is Relationship 180 located?
Relationship 180 is on the corner of Marguerite Parkway and Oso. So it's just right down Marguerite, about 3 miles down. And so, yes, that's where that is.
Okay. Todd, do you have one there?
Yeah, somebody asked, I fall into 2 different categories. Is that normal? So someone said like an avoider and a pleaser is what they said in this
Yeah.
case. But
Yeah, if avoiders and pleasers sometimes score in both, many times score in both areas because they're alike in this way. Neither one likes conflict, and we didn't have an honest conversation until the 15-year mark. Because I'm an avoider, and I don't want to talk about it, and he's a pleaser, and he doesn't want me to be mad and separate, so we're just not going to talk about it. So they're alike in that way. How they're different is the avoider can detach and not be concerned. If he was upset, I'm like, he'll get over it. That's how it works. You just get over it. If I was upset, he was distressed. And pleasers get upset if other people are not doing well or are upset or mad at them. And so that's the biggest difference. And we have a whole, you go to the freebies page on our website. There's a lot of great free stuff there. And one of them is the similarities and differences between the styles.
Yeah, and it's at howwelove.com. But I'll add one more thing to that. If a person says, I'm an avoider and a pleaser, I'm a kind of a combination, we ask them the question, do you get mad? Do you protest?
You're talking about an avoider and a pleaser and a vacillator.
No. I'm talking about the question was the avoider and the pleaser.
Okay.
Because some vacillators think they're pleasers, and then they get hurt and upset, and they become avoidant, or they pull away from the person.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
With me?
Yeah.
Okay.
I love this.
So
This is real life right here, right?
So what happens is we ask, do you ever get angry? And is anger a part of your withdrawal? And if the answer is yes, then we say, well, you're probably a vacillator, because they really want to please, and they love people, and they want to just really present well and make people happy. But then when they get hurt, or the idealizations they have in their mind about anything is not met, they get upset, they protest, they get angry, and then they pull away. So here, they look like an avoider. And so that is just another possibility, is to explore the anger quotient involved.
One more thing, there is a quiz on the website, and if you test high in 4 areas, 3 or 4, usually a sign of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to us about, now that you said that, talk to us just a little bit more about, because we've had a lot of questions even here about, avoiders, pleasers, vacillators, but talk to us a little bit more about the controller and victim. I mean, what's a path, you listed some paths forward and stuff, but what if you're in a relationship with someone who is a controller or a victim, and so everything is just at a whole different level?
Right.
How do you move forward in relationship?
Well, unfortunately, that group doesn't often come to therapy unless it's court-ordered. Honestly, I say that with all due respect for their trauma, because they really don't understand why is it so difficult and why is it so hard. But when you come from a traumatic background, and sometimes you need to tell other people your story. People, I didn't have any trauma. And then you start listening to the stories and you're like, oh, no, that's trauma. Then in that category, you're not only not learning the things you need to have healthy adult relationships, you're being wounded. So you just start out adulthood in a hole, if you think about it. Sometimes, of all the groups, sometimes a separation is necessary with a commitment to reconnect if there's if there's violence or abuse, or a person is scared, or the kids are being harmed. There needs to be a separation. And I've seen people that absolutely won't budge until there's that much to lose. And sometimes, one or the other still won't grow. But it's very important to stop the cycle, because it's often generational. People from trauma create their own chaotic homes, that create their own chaotic kids, that create the next generation of trauma. And we've seen some very brave people break that cycle, and they have really reversed and started a whole new generation of much more healthy kids and people.
And you don't break a cycle like that with a fight. You break a cycle like that by saying, this just isn't working. We have to do something different. Here are the options. And this is called boundaries, where I go, I will not tolerate this any longer. Now, I'm going to say something that may be alarming to some of you, but a lot of chaotic people, controlling type people, can actually be highly involved in church. A lot of people can end up at the top of the leadership of a church because they have so much zip and zing and power and energy and intensity, and we think, man, that person's really filled with the Holy Spirit. And in reality, they're so controlling, if you say no to them, they go berserk on you. Don't say no to that person. It's their way or the highway, even in the name of Jesus. And then they'll find all the Bible verses to validate and verify that. I mean, all these attachment styles have a Bible verse, for pleasers, turn the other cheek, I mean, stuff like that. So anyhow, it's a real challenge, but you know what? A couple like this, they need to get help. It's very difficult to do this sometimes by yourself. You need to have somebody else in your corner to help you through this. Perhaps even legal advice to somebody to help you know what are your options. And if your spouse does not want to change, you can grow anyhow. We tell people with growth-resistive spouses, you choose to change. And that will change the dynamic in your home, even if it's only you that is changing.
I did have one question. I think you answered a number of the different ones here. One question was, for somebody who might have been in like law enforcement or something like that, been trained to just sort of shut off their emotions.
Yeah.
How does that person start to open up more to be able to connect then with their wife and kids and all that?
Boy, that's a great question.
Yeah, it's a very good question.
Kay?
Well, certain professions, certainly at the work, they do have to compartmentalize. Police officers, people in medical,
First responders.
And sometimes even therapists in their offices. But it's very important to have another place where you can process. And, they're recognizing that now a lot more and offering therapy and treatment, and especially a therapeutic process called EMDR can really take down the level of trauma that one feels in the body for different situations that they've gone through or traumatic events. I know a lot of the doctors and nurses that went through COVID were very traumatized. So if you don't know what EMDR is, Google it. There's tons of information on it, but it really is a therapeutic technique that takes down the level of reactivity in the body and mind from traumatic childhood trauma, recent trauma, or just chronic trauma.
Kay, you said something earlier to us privately that you had been listening to something that Peter Scazzaro had been talking about. Peter Scazzaro is a pastor in the Queens, New York, and he wrote the book, The Emotionally Healthy Church, Emotionally Healthy Discipleship. And what is emotional health? And so he talks about that our discipleship journey isn't complete without emotional intelligence and emotional development. So what we have to say to the person, no matter what their background is, we have to be able to say we all have to learn to be emotionally intelligent in order to be more like Christ. Christ and our Heavenly Father, our God, is a highly emotionally intelligent God. And if we're supposed to be transformed to the image of Christ, Ephesians 4, then we have to learn to develop that aspect. So if I'm a policeman, if I'm a first responder, if I'm somebody that has been, especially even military, and you're just sort of steeled off all of your emotions, it's a choice. Do I want to follow the Lord, or am I going to follow my training? And then it becomes hard work to have to learn something. What I've found is I'm able to do both now. I'm able to have the emotional intelligence side and the empathetic side, but I can also be strong and have a strength as well. So those two things can be held in balance. Jesus was tough and tender. He could cry over here one time, and over here, he could look at the Pharisees and get in a brawl in the corner of Jerusalem and 3rd Street, you know? And he could, and if I was one of his disciples, I'd be going like this, you know, like, did you have to do that now? We were going to lunch, you know? But he would just take on the religious leaders and just boom! And so he had both. Our goal is to have both.
I want to add one thing. Use a list of feeling words to at least get something out in the open. And then I had to pray for God to give me my tears back. They were very locked down. And I thought, if I'm going to be like Jesus, I have to be able to cry. And I really couldn't cry. And it took a couple years to really see God answer that prayer, but he did. And I would say my stress level has gone down, and my depression has been less since I learned to cry. And that's true for anxious people, too, to some extent.
This would be maybe our last question, unless you had some other like brilliant question there, Todd. Okay, they're all brilliant, but you know, some are even more brilliant. Is the question you allude to, you just said, I had to learn how to cry. Mm-hmm. So several people have asked, I'm in a relationship with an avoider, mm-hmm. or someone I love is an avoider, but they are not particularly interested, right. And this is all just to everything. So how do you help start? How do you help start that? Because again, I think you've said you can only do what you can do for yourself.
Right.
Because somebody else may or may not be at a place where they're either able or willing to take some of those steps. So at the end, we do have to be responsible for ourselves. But what was there in you as an avoider that finally pushed you to the place of saying, I don't want to go through life like this?
Well, I want to make one distinction because, you know, you have the autistic spectrum, and so someone can look like an avoider and be on the autistic spectrum. And you really need to recognize that that's a possibility and really do some investigation and reading about that because, you know, that's a whole nother roadblock that needs to be addressed, or even sometimes with personality disorders. But for me, it was about obedience to God. That I realized after I looked at my history that we never bonded in my family, that we didn't comfort one another, that we didn't ever talk about feelings. And I realized that's not healthy. And a lot of avoiders can be very resistant because they don't know what they're missing. Mm-hmm. If you've never had comfort, well, why would I need it? If you've never had someone really listen with any kind of compassion, why would I need that? So it's almost like they're starting out in a zone where they are needless. And sometimes it's a sell job to avoiders to get them to see, look, God created you to have needs and to be able to ask for help. And sooner or later in life, you will have needs. Life will wear you down, and I see a lot of people in their mid-range and a little older who life breaks them down.
And that's called pain.
And that's called pain. And it's like if you have no way to process pain, you're in trouble because life is painful. And so to recognize that if you're an avoider, what you missed is critically important. The avoider babies, this is very interesting. The toddlers who were avoiders didn't care that their mom walked out of the room. They looked like they didn't care. They didn't seek comfort. At 18 months of age, they did not look to the mom for comfort, but their stress hormones were just as high as the kids who were crying. When they tested their cortisol levels, they were very high, just as high as the kids who were having a fit. But this baby at 18 months and 2 years old had already learned that person isn't going to help me, that person's not going to really see my need, I'm just going to sit over here and play with this toy. So that's pre-verbal. So these things can happen very early.
So I have one other suggestion. If you're married to the emotionally avoidant person who is resistive to this stuff, and you went like this a minute ago, and you go, all this stuff, and they're resistant to that stuff. So what if that were the case, and I handed them our book, and I said, you know, I think I'm the pleaser or the vacillator. Would you read this chapter? Because I'm trying to learn to grow here. similar to your talk you gave 5 years ago on blind spots, where you said, what's it like to be on the other side of me? I love that talk. It was a great talk. But if you said, look, here I am, I think this is me. Would you read it and tell me if you agree that this chapter describes me? You're starting to introduce them in a winsome way, or there's a lewsome, but this is a winsome way of getting that was corny. I know, it was a dad joke. Of getting them to buy in to the validity of this, and then to say, there's growth goals for the pleaser. Would you pick one or two that I could work on so that I could work on trying to grow out of this place? And then that approach is just, I think, really important.
That is great advice. Y'all, I'm going to end it here because we've reached our time for today. One thing that maybe we can talk about at another time, maybe have, is just, I don't think we've mentioned how cultural differences also, how that can interplay in attachment style, and even maybe if you grew up in a culture in which talking about feelings or having feelings it's not just your family, it's a cultural response. So we didn't say that, but that's also a really important thing to consider. Okay, so as we are closing down, today we have, if you would like someone to pray for you, you'd like to have our prayer team just pray for you, your family, whatever you're going through. The back on the left, our prayer team is eager. Sorry, they're on the right today. They're willing to pray for you. They're very compassionate, caring people, and would be thrilled to spend some time with you. Also, the resource table straight back, some handouts and free resources, places where you can get other help. Just to remind you, next month, again, we will be meeting in the Plaza View room, not the Tent 3, and Plaza View is in the building straight behind us to the right. In case you don't know, we'll have signs. And then I wanted to just tell you, in July, we have the incredible privilege of having Wendell Moss. There's Wendell. Wendell is a therapist and a speaker and a pastor. He's at the Allender Center in Seattle, Washington. And Wendell, I left my paper that has the description. Do we have the kind of the description of, yeah, okay, so wow. I have to turn around to do this. Wendell is fiercely committed to engaging the impact of sexual abuse and trauma, including racial trauma. He courageously and compassionately follows Jesus into realms of healing in the most wounded places, especially the places where people are bound by relational heartache, addictions, shame, and contempt. Although he's privileged and delighted to work with both men and women, Wendell loves to create context of healing for men, especially African American men. You are going to love Wendell. I want you to come next month, and I think that what he's got to say is going to be very powerful. And then Kay mentioned EMDR as a therapy. In August, I don't have a picture, but Dr. Kurt Rounzen is going to be speaking to us, and he is a specialist and psychiatrist and practices, is trained in EMDR. That is his whole practice, to help people who've experienced trauma. So we'll get to hear more about what that looks like and how that might be applicable in your life. In September, Kayla Steckline, that's Suicide Prevention Month, and we're going to be talking specifically about suicide and suicide prevention. And stay tuned for October and November, and then December is our Christmas party. I can't believe we're in June already talking about Christmas, but there it is. There's kind of the lineup. Thank you so much for being here. Let me just pray for us as we close. Father, thank you for this time together, just the safety of this room, of this space to share our lives, the ups and the downs, the goods and the bad, the places where we're struggling, the places where we're doing okay, and the places where maybe we are just not doing well at all. God, you have made us in your image, as we've been reminded today. There's a beauty and a richness to our existence because you gave us emotions. I pray that as we go from here, as we look at look at the words, look at the resources, look at the soul words, look at the information that's been shared, God, that something that maybe needs to happen within us would begin to happen. We'd have the courage and the hope to believe that we can be different, that some of the things that have kept us bound, some of those places where relationships are so difficult, that today would actually become a turning point for new kinds of caring, new kinds of friendships, new kinds of marriages, new kinds of relationships as brothers and sisters in Christ through what Milan and Kay have shared. We love you and look forward to being together again in a month. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen.
Amen.
God bless you all. So glad that you're here.